Welcome to Built for MENA, the podcast exploring the real stories shaping advertising and marketing technology across the Middle East. This is a region moving fast, from retail media and programmatic out-of-home to AI, data regulation, and platforms scaling across vastly different markets. But too often, the real stories behind that growth do not get told. Each episode, I speak with the people's building, selling, scaling, and sometimes breaking AdTech and MarTech in the Middle East. I do this to understand what actually works here and what doesn't, and why this region is so different. I'm Dom Kozak, and in every episode, I ask each guest the same question, so we can compare experiences, surface patterns, and get past the press releases. So, to get started, can you tell us who you are, what you do today, and the path that led you into AdTech or MarTech in the Middle East?
Amazing, Dom. Thanks for having me on. Oliver Klander, Regional Vice President for LiveRamp, MENA brands. And really excited to do this quick fire 7 questions. Slightly daunting at the same time. So the first question is the what got me into AdTech, is that right?
Yeah, so why don't we go into what got you into AdTech and MarTech specifically in the Middle East, and maybe a little bit about who LiveRamp are and what you do.
Okay, yeah. So let's start with the former first, or the latter, I should say. LiveRamp is a technology business that helps brands, organizations join data together to enable multiple different outcomes, from analytics to measurement to insights through to activation across the wider ecosystem to collaboration between multiple different both brands, partners, and the ecosystem. And we're a global business working in all the continents. So really quite exciting. And my journey with LiveRamp's a little over 5 years old. And I actually took the role heading up the Middle East just over 2 years ago in the region when LiveRamp decided to move into the region. And I couldn't have been more excited to join, because the one thing that the Middle East, and I've worked across the Middle East since 2013, but having a hyper focus on the region was really exciting, because the Middle East is never stopping innovation. It's innovating at breakneck speed. What it also does is it gives an opportunity for the region to be able to take note of what's happening elsewhere. Things that have taken 10 years to come to fruition across continental Europe or even North America or elsewhere, the Middle East can take learnings from that and actually implement faster. So that's why I enjoy working in the Middle East, and it's why I think it's a huge opportunity at this moment in time for the AdTech MarTech space.
I will let you into a little secret, Oliver. I actually have a little, what should we call it? A professional crush on LiveRamp. I think it's one of those great businesses which does the so what really well. You know, it takes data that we all have, but it actually makes it actionable. So there's a little positive plug for me as we get going. But thinking about the region more generally, can you take us back to the moment that you realized the Middle East was genuinely different for advertising or for AdTech, and what happened there?
I think this comes on to my previous point, and it really does center around the innovation and speed of change. The Middle East does not want to come second, right? They always want to be first.
Absolutely.
Whether that is through advertising, whether that's through tech, whether it's through AI, whether it's through flying cars and drones, whether it is the hyperloop that goes from one to the end. It's the Middle East is always looking to be first to the gate. That comes with 2 complexities, right? The first thing is that speed can sometimes negate the proper planning and the foundational pieces that you need to put in place. But I think that actually that's outweighed by the drive and desire to succeed with whatever's being implemented. So that's when I knew that this is a genuinely exciting region to work in.
Wow. Okay. Yeah. Look, I couldn't agree more. The speed of innovation, unencumbered by perhaps some heritage and legacy here, really is something quite different. But that's the positive side of things. But I'm also thinking, perhaps, what about the more negative side of things? What's the biggest AdTech or MarTech mistake that you've seen the companies make when entering or trying to scale in this region?
It's a really interesting question. Nuance and market understanding is the biggest mistake. And by that I mean that the Middle East is intrinsically pockets, and I consider LiveRamp does as well, considers the GCC as one specific region. So KSA, Oman, Bahrain, Kuwait, Qatar, UAE, all one big region that we work across. And I think the common mistake that people think about when entering this region is that they've got a product and their product's great and loads of people outside of that region are using it. But if there's no proof points and no cases and nobody on the ground that's actually talking about it, then it won't scale within region. You have to be on ground. You have to build the relationships with the wider ecosystem, whether that's publishers, platforms, brands, retailers. So you have to be there, actually proliferating your story and your sort of case.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that resonates a lot with me. I know when I arrived, my initial remit was just the UAE, and quickly widened out to the whole of the GCC. And those cultural nuances, those relationships in each of those sub-markets are absolutely critical to success, certainly from my opinion. But we've said this region is perhaps a bit different. But can you tell us about a campaign or a product or a situation that made you think that this could only have happened here in the Middle East?
I thought about this question when you sent these over, and I had a look at them, and I thought this is a really interesting question because my instant reaction is not necessarily a campaign product, but I think a situation is the one that I'm going to go for, because campaign and products is like, I got loads of success stories of work done with, brands and retailers and other organizations across the region. But that's like, everybody's got a case study. Case studies exist everywhere around the world. That's what success stories are all about. You're not going to produce a case study with bad results, right? But the reality is that I think only in the Middle East or MENA, situationally, is the ease and ability to network and build your trusted circle. I think that elsewhere across like continental Europe and other different regions, the UK and so forth, it can be somewhat a reserved industry. If you don't know the person, networking can be sometimes a little bit tough. Whereas in the Middle East, no matter whether it's a CEO, CMO, a director or a manager or a planner, if you're at an IAB event or you're at another industry event, everybody talks to each other. Everybody wants to know more. So I think the thing that I would say only in the Middle East is that your ability to connect, if you're willing, is unparalleled. You have no barriers to that connection.
Yeah, you're right. I can certainly agree with that. I don't think there's the prevalence of gatekeeping that maybe you see in Europe. It's certainly something I noticed when I arrived into the market, that actually making connections and having good, honest conversations was really, really easy at almost any level. And doors were open, people want to listen and want to learn. Within that environment, how has then working with brands, agencies, or even governments here changed the way that you personally think about advertising or ad tech?
Yeah, I don't think anything's necessarily changed. I think things are more compounded. And by compounded, I mean, ultimately, value is the most important driver. right? So in any engagement, every party who engages with each other needs to extract value from that relationship, right? By and large, I should say. So the reality is that MENA is not immune to that. And I actually think it is compounded. So we've talked about the speed of change and innovation. The expectation of value identification is also hyper-focused, right? So when you're working with brands, agencies, governments, whoever it be, and you are offering a technological solution that has an outcome-based approach, you have to be very, very specific and cognizant of that value exchange with your end client or your partner that you're working with, because that's the most important thing.
So is that value exchange short-termism? And if so, does that have a negative consequence?
Yeah, it's a really good point. It can be short-termism, and in some instances, the value exchange might be unreasonable. But I think that this starts right at the beginning of the conversation. So before you even get into a situation where value identification isn't aligned, you need to understand exactly what the success metrics and the KPIs are and what perceived value is. And I think this region in particular does not like to be sold something that doesn't translate into what was promised at the beginning of the project, right?
Sure.
That creates the biggest amount of friction in this region. That can be quite hard to navigate.
Yeah, that age-old question of what does good actually look like?
Yeah.
Great. And taking that one step further and thinking about maybe perceptions as a region, is there an AdTech or MarTech trend here in MENA that you think people outside the region are completely misunderstanding right now?
I'm gonna maybe might flip that question on its head a little bit. Please do in your A1 to A7. I think unless you work in the Middle East, you can't quite comprehend what it is like working in that region, because it is so different to more established regions that you really need to be an agent of change to fit in within that. But if you do, that's great. I think that potentially misunderstood trends are probably domestic. So things like commerce/retail media, the delineation and difference between on-site and off-site, the difference between different mediums. Because this has come out of the gates in breakneck speed over the last just over 24 months, like you've got swathes of retailers, monetizing their loyalty schemes, monetizing their transaction data, creating an ecosystem for brands and agencies to get. I think the misunderstood trend is where it fits within the P&L and where it fits within that sort of overall marketing strategy. And I did a podcast quite recently with both Gida and Crin from Mondelez. So Gida's from Arla and Crin's from Mondelez, discussing the exact same thing, right? Expectations versus reality versus value versus what can actually be delivered. So that's probably the misunderstood trend that I would probably focus on.
Okay, interesting. So we're seeing, would I be correct in saying then we're seeing the explosion of new channels in the region or new to the region channels that perhaps are upsetting the established status quo?
Yeah, I think you are. They're not necessarily new channels. It's just the ready availability of them, right? And this is going to, over the next 12 months. And I know I'm answering your last question.
Why not?
In part, maybe. Over the next 12 months, we're going to see the same level of pace and innovation and change, if not more, than we've seen in the last 2 years, right? As you start to think about Disney, Netflix, Paramount, all of these sort of publishers coming into the region, as Amazon builds out a bigger footprint in region, these are all ripe for opportunity for these sort of connection ecosystems to start to grow. So I think that we're going to see a huge amount of stratospheric change over the next 12 months. So it's an exciting time to be in MarTech, AdTech at the moment.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, exciting time and exciting place, I would say, as well. But imagine then that if I had a magic wand and we could stop what's been going on so far and start again. And if you had to build or sell either an AdTech or MarTech solution into the Middle East from scratch today, is there anything you would do differently or a particular area you would focus on, perhaps?
No. And I'm going to be really honest on this one. I think that the one thing that Middle East has in bucket loads that the rest of the world didn't have is the innate understanding of the importance of first-party data. And by that, I'm talking about the sheer volume of loyalty schemes that are collecting data across multiple different brands units, from the likes of a Landmark, a Majid Al Futtaim, Al Shire, and a whole host of others of conglomerates that are collecting it. So I think that is a massive tick and a massive win. I think the only thing that I would be cognizant of if I was entering in the market is what is the connectivity of the ecosystem like, and how do I expand and increase my addressable reach? That's the most important thing.
Absolutely. You've got the data, but what do you actually do with it, and how do you apply it in the real world? Okay, so we've talked about the markets moving fast and accelerating and evolving. So what about thinking into the future? So 5 years from now, what do you think advertising in the Middle East will be known for from a global perspective? And is there anything that needs to happen for that to become a reality?
5 years from now is a really long time for the Middle East, isn't it? If I think about the change that's happened in just over 2 years, whilst I've been in it, it was like 2.5 years. I shudder to think what's going to be happening in 5 years. One thing I think that I've been interesting to see and watch is the rise of companies like, for example, Advertimer, and the in-screen, in-store advertising that's happening. So I think that 5 years from now, the Middle East may well be known for far more advanced advertising, displays, concepts, utilizing data to drive better consumer experiences and better outcomes. And I think that as the region continues to grow and thrive, that will only become more of a compelling part. Plus, Dom, at the end of the day, when you look at the results from the IAB MENA online digital ad spend, out of North America, LATAM, continental Europe, and MENA, and I think I might be missing one. I can't remember what it was. Oh, APAC. The MENA region was growing exponentially larger than everybody else, right? At like 17% or 15 or 17%. And the next highest one was 10%. So that region, even through sort of the trials and tribulations of what happened, obviously, a number of months ago, was still growing and is still moving forward, right? So that's what I think is probably really exciting.
Interesting. Yeah, look, I couldn't agree with you more. The pace of changes and growth, in fact, is huge and outstripping the kind of, should we call them more established markets or traditional markets, if you like. I'm going to chuck in now just one extra question, which I didn't share with you, so apologies for that. But I just thought, thinking about the IAB digital ad spend report and the trajectory in the region, we've obviously gone through a recent period of geopolitical uncertainty, let's say. What do you think the impact of that will be on the region, if anything?
Oh, it's a really interesting question. Look, there's no denying that the timing of that was really unfortunate, right? Both pre, in, and post Ramadan, spends just disappeared. People weren't spending money for advertising anywhere. So that was a big chunk of a two-step year of advertising that the region lost, right? That said, I always look at the Middle East and I think that, even when you go back to like the 2008 crisis and there were cars that were covered in sand and people were leaving and, always comes out 20 times stronger, right? And I firmly believe that we're already seeing a rise, and brands will come back and businesses will come back, retailers will come back to the table with a renewed sense of vigor, which they're already doing at the moment.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I can speak anecdotally from a sample size of one, but we're already looking at having a much better summer this year than we did last year, for example. So that recovery is already on track, and I think is going to continue to outpace previous years. But thank you very much for those insights. Let's finish with a 30-second quickfire round. The first answer that comes to your mind, please, and as much as possible, one-word answers only. Obviously, you may have to go to 2 or 3 for some, I'm sure. So MENA advertising in one word.
Exciting.
The most overrated buzzword in AdTech right now.
Retail media.
The most underrated opportunity in MENA AdTech.
Retail media.
Excellent. Relationships or technology?
Relationships.
And then one skill AdTech professionals in MENA must develop next.
Humility and understanding.
Ooh, I like that. Thank you so much. That was Oliver Klander. Thanks for listening. And if you're building, buying, or betting on AdTech in the Middle East, we'll see you in the next episode.